please, a wholehearted Manlius Reform greeting to Tom Edwards.
I feel like I can go home now. Nice to have you all here this morning. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. And of course, nobody's interested in the election, so but let's take a look. And what we're going to look at, just kind of keep my feet to the fire. We want to leave enough time for questions and stuff as well. We're actually going to look at elections all the way through, national and then down to local as well. The midterm elections really do have kind of an interesting history in our politics. When we look back over time, I'm going to show you a graphic in a few minutes about how midterm elections have gone since the beginning of the country. But our recent past is really most interesting of all. In all three elections in the last, about 3 elections in the last 100 years, the party in control of the House has changed. The president has lost control, or at least lost seats in the House in all but 3 of those elections, and 2 of those were during FDR's years, which shows you how long ago that was. In our last 3 midterms, 2006, 2010, 2014, the president's party actually lost control of the House. Okay, so this is a trend that has been a century in the making. And frankly, the expectation this time is not much different, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the bigger question is, what happens in the midterm? Why is that true? And what types of things go on in the midterm that don't go on in a presidential year? And most political analysts will come up with 3 general ideas about midterms that cause that difference to take place. And the first, the midterm election allows voters to express their satisfaction or their dissatisfaction with the administration. But if you look at the trend, you can tell instantly which side is being expressed more widely. And there's nothing really unusual about that. Think about who goes to town meetings. People that are unhappy. So who goes out and votes in the midterm election? People that are unhappy, generally. And then again, we've got a 100-year trend to demonstrate that. Now, obviously not everybody's unhappy, but the voter turnout is really quite low, as we'll see in a few minutes. So generally, dissatisfaction with the president or the party in power is certainly a significant factor in the midterms. Now, while a state may have swung one way or another in the Electoral College, and of course the news is giving you lots of play about that, that doesn't necessarily come down particularly to the House level. You know, we may very well, in our own congressional district, have issues that go beyond what's going on in the nation. That said, there are certainly there are presidential issues here as well, but a district will have a distinctive history, and ours certainly does. If you think about our district, we've actually changed our representative 3 times in the last 5 elections. That's actually, folks, what's supposed to happen. When the founders wrote the Constitution, that's what they expected. They did not expect a representative from urban Detroit to be there for 51 years. And the average in Congress right now is well into the 20s. And that was not what was anticipated. So we've actually done our job in the last 10 years or so, and we can't say that everywhere. So there might be something that's going on. The district's history. Sometimes you get something that takes place. You get an anomaly, for example, that takes place. Sometimes the president has very deep coattail effects that only last 1 election. And then the district reverts back to its normal procedure. It's a Democratic district, let's say. Take the Reagan election in 1980. A lot of local Democratic districts that have been reliably Democratic for years. In that Republican sweep, all of a sudden you had a Republican representative. Many of them were single term. Okay? And then in the midterm, the district goes back to its history. Okay? It was a majority Democratic district. All of a sudden you have Democrats back in the House. So that tends to happen. Is there a contentious local election going on that's going to bring out the vote? Okay, that can have a huge impact, obviously, on particularly a congressional race. It may have nothing to do with the congressional race. If you've got particularly an urban district, where an urban senator is very dominant, and there's a contentious mayoral race, all of a sudden people are going to come out for the mayoral race, but that's not all they're going to vote for. Okay, so they'll vote for something else. So is there something else going on? And then, of course, we understand, we're going to talk a little bit later on about gerrymandering as well. You have gerrymandered districts. They're not unique to New York State by any means, and the problem is out there. It has come before the Supreme Court this year. They turned back all 3 cases, but they are going to make their way right back up there. So we're going to see gerrymandering in the future. I try to be as nonpartisan as I can in my cartoons. This one, I actually like both of these. This one, you can't read it from the back, says FBI Trump-Russia investigation, and it's called The Elephant in the Elephant's Room. It's not really here, he's not really here, he's not really here. And on this side, seriously, this isn't enough for the midterms, and that's a serious issue. Okay? You can't just be against something, and you have to be for something as well. The second issue is geography. What is happening in that House district that might be unique to that district and nothing else? And there are a lot of districts where that's true. Think in terms of, say, a president's policy. Has it had a direct economic impact on that district? Think back to when Jimmy Carter, for example, canceled the B-1 bombing. There were 315 congressional districts that were online to make parts for the B-1 bombing. And all of a sudden, all those potential jobs aren't there. So if your district, like ours, we had part of the contract was here in this congressional district at GE in those days, all of a sudden those potential jobs are gone. That's an in-district issue that doesn't necessarily affect, say, the North Country, where there wasn't anything going to happen. So is there something going on within your district, particularly if the president is involved and the president's party is involved? And it often goes to things like defense contracting, or even sometimes things like roads and interstate highway money, things like that. What is happening that might impact your district? The more confined area as well. A state, of course, is a large entity, so you get a lot of money spent in the state, but not New York. When it came to the election last year, and actually elections pretty much since the Reagan years, New York is a safe state. Democrats really don't have to do a lot of campaigning here at the national level. And they don't. The Electoral College, one of the things that it does, and one of the reasons why we have maintained it, is because the parties like it, because they can spend their money more appropriately. If we had a general popular election, they'd have to spend money everywhere. This way they don't. You don't have to campaign if you're a Democratic candidate. You don't really have to campaign in New York or California. Why bother? And certainly not in Hawaii. You don't have to bother to do that. Different story for the House districts, particularly. If you want to swing the House, or if you have a contentious Senate race, which in New York we don't either, you've got to spend money here. But it allows you to spend money in confined areas. You're not going to spend, if you're in the Democratic Party, let's say, you're not going to spend a lot of money in a safe Republican district. It just doesn't pay to do that. And the reverse is also true. But if there's a contentious election, it allows you to focus your money, focus your advertising ability. And of course, you're not supposed to have any direct impact on your PACs, but you can sort of drop really big hints that you might want money spent in these districts. And so these are some of the things that affect, again, the geography and what affects an off-year election or a midterm election. The third is the overall national political climate. At the moment, according to really all wisdom, it should favor the administration. Because take a look at, you've seen the figures in the last couple of months, unemployment is at record lows. There are no major wars going on. We do have, obviously issues in Afghanistan and Iraq still, but there's no Vietnam taking place or anything like that. Stocks, therefore people's IRAs, retirement accounts, all that sort of stuff, are the highest they've ever been. And keep in mind that when you think, oh my gosh, the stock market took a 1,000-point tumble the other day. Remember when the stock market was at 800? Yes. Okay, it's now at 24,000. And we can see that it can change 2,000 points in a day. So we don't really worry too much about that. And the general economy is growing. And ordinarily, that would be very favorable to the administration. The other side of that, however, in spite of that economic growth on paper, wages are still flat across the country. They have not gone up. You still have pockets of areas, and I happen to live in one, I live in Oswego County. There has been virtually no change whatsoever in Oswego County. If you're unaware of what's happening just to your north, Oswego County has a 25% poverty rate, a 25% underemployment rate on top of that. So 50% of the county is underemployed or unemployed. 14% of the houses are vacant, most of them in foreclosure of one sort or another. 72% of the children in Oswego County schools are on free or reduced lunch. Okay, so the average income, household income in Oswego County, household income is $39,000. Wow. Okay, so there's some significant issues going on up there. Okay, and so it really is kind of interesting. So all of this growth has sort of bypassed Oswego County, and there are hundreds of Oswego counties across the country. Okay, and so on the one hand, yes, all the numbers look really good for the administration. When it comes down to the local level, they don't necessarily translate, so it's kind of interesting. Now, most people, the tax law is interesting because in most of what we're seeing in the horrendously negative ads that are on, it all has to do with the tax law. And if you actually believe the ads, it doesn't matter which person makes it into the House of Representatives. We're all going to be taxed to death within the next 2 years. And obviously that's not true. But the tax laws are interesting. On the one hand, most people have seen some small raises, at least, in their take-home pay. If you're on a retirement of some sort, you've probably seen a little bit of an increase. Social Security went up slightly because of changes in the federal tax laws. So people have seen a little bit of raise in their take-home pay. But one of the issues is we have not yet been through April. Okay, so really, we don't know what's going to happen. We know theoretically what's going to happen. And of course, both parties have different ideas about theoretically what's going to happen. But we really don't need, we haven't seen that. That may make a difference going into the 2020 election, okay, when we actually have lived through then 2 April cycles under the new tax law. But right now, that's all speculative. And most of what we're seeing is probably exaggerated claims in one side or another. And that's not unanticipated in an election year. So we'll see what's happening. Now, generally, midterm elections are relatively predictable and fairly dull. Okay? They really don't do an awful lot. State races tend to be subscribed at a much lower rate than the national races. In a presidential year in 2014, the last midterm, non-presidential year, just 36% of registered voters voted. And that's quite low. In the presidential years, it's up towards 60%, which is still far too low, but it's about half of that for a midterm. This year might be different. There is some thought that while it probably won't reach presidential levels at 60%, people are thinking that it might reach perhaps 45 or 50% of registered voters, because there's a lot of contentious races out there, which is interesting. There are a lot of divisive issues out there, a lot of interesting personalities that may energize voters beyond the typical. This is an interesting graph for a number of reasons. This orange line that you see here is relative voter turnout in midterm elections. The blue line is presidential elections. And if you notice, in the early days of our country's history, the midterm elections were much more important than the presidential election, because people genuinely felt that their House representative, particularly the one closest to them, was far more important than the president. Okay? The legislative branch was the people's branch. And so until 1848, which is where the crossover takes place, that people really came out for the local election, not so much for the presidential election. What changes in 1848? Slavery. Okay, that's the year after the first election after the Mexican War, when you had the expansion into Mexican territory, potentially of slavery. From that point on, the presidential election has actually outdrawn the midterms, sometimes by substantial amounts. Depends on where you are. This is actually the last election here, and you can see that the space has actually increased in that small amount of time. It's just an interesting point in our history. And so what might affect voter turnout this year that might make this election a little different? And that's kind of interesting to watch. Well, first and foremost is the Trump factor. And there is absolutely no question that that is an important factor. Trump inspires incredible loyalty among his followers, and he also inspires incredible loathing on those who don't like him. Now, his followers also tend to show up at the polls. Okay? That is one thing that he has done. Like him or don't like him, he got people to get out and vote. And that is, if you've paid any attention the last couple of weeks, that's been basically his big thing on these campaign swings, particularly for the Senate seats. He's trying to maintain the Senate. Just get out and vote. Don't be lazy. Get yourself out there. And his opponents might get out too, because a lot of people feel that if they had gotten out and voted in 2016, we might have a different president. And there was a lot of that, I don't know who to vote for, so I'm going to stay home. Okay, that was apparently a mistake. Now, if the vocal opposition is in traditional Democratic areas, like California, for example, all that energizing, crowd-pleasing stuff coming out there isn't going to make any difference, because California's going to vote Democratic anyway. Okay? On the other hand, the numbers won't matter. By the way, Republicans, interestingly enough, I just learned this about a week ago, Republicans now in California are the third party. Okay? Democrats, about 38–39% of Californians are registered Democrats. 28% are not registered. They're officially independent, and only 24% are Republicans. So they've literally become the third party in California. That's kind of interesting. Now, on the other hand, if energized Democrats show up in Indiana, let's say, they might swing that Senate election in a big way. So where they are, we're going to talk more about this in a few minutes too, where that energized group is has a huge impact. But the Trump factor is very, very critical. And turnout, of course, is the key. Low voter turnout, yeah, I showed this, I'm showing this to some of the kids that I work with, and they're looking at, they missed the total criteria. So, what's a telephone booth? We're showing our age here. Oh well. Low voter turnout usually favors incumbents. Okay? It usually favors incumbents. Or if a district, again, swung in that coattail effect, they became temporarily Democratic or Republican, it favors the party that district is generally noted for. The presidential election, significant numbers of Democrats stayed home, particularly the Bernie or bust crowd, which were primarily younger Democrats, but not exclusively. And a lot of them just simply refused to vote. There were also, in the last presidential election, 3 million people nationally who voted. They showed up at the polls, they pulled a lever for somebody, but they did not pull a lever for the president. So that it's about 2% of the people who voted, close to 3%. So we're not exactly sure. Will they vote this time? If they do vote this time, how will they vote this time?
You mean their vote was not counted?
No, they did not pull that lever. So they voted for Congress, they voted for mayor, they voted for whatever else, but they left the presidential line blank. Okay, and that's about 3 million voters, give or take. Okay, and again, will they vote this time? That's a key question. And then how will they vote this time? Okay, that's an interesting question too. And millennials, and we're going to come back to millennials again, they may be more energized by the issues this time. And certainly when you look at particularly the protest groups that are out there, they tend to be millennials. Millennials are roughly 35 and younger. Okay, that's generally considered the millennial group, so 18 to 35. So they'll be more energized this time if they show up. And the general thought is that would certainly favor Democrats because of registration among millennials who have chosen to register in a party is very heavily Democratic, as opposed to Republican, which is interesting. So this is an interesting part of it too. And this is part of the Trump factor as well. Can he get Republicans, particularly in these swing states, to come to the polls? And remember, again, go back to the town meeting. People that are satisfied generally don't show up. So can he get them to the polls? Trump has also been campaigning very hard, reminding his followers that they need to show up. His tactics are interesting, and he's predicting, of course, dire consequences if they don't. Now, he has been concentrating on the Senate, as opposed to the House. In the last couple of weeks, I don't think he's spoken actually for any House people. He's been concentrating on these Senate races, and that may be, we'll come back to this too, might be conceding the House, because the House will probably change. Historically, it will change. But that would mean he would keep the Senate, which would help his agenda stay on track, be a little more difficult, obviously. His opponents, of course, have been stressing the need to check this renegade president. Okay, that you need us in there to keep a check on him. Okay, so he's a factor from both sides. And again, the Trump factor is a bit more important in the Senate races than in the House races. It's a factor in the House races, but not as much. Okay, not as much. But what's interesting, if you look at ads from across the country, the Trump factor is even filtered down into some local races. Okay, particularly if there's an issue over a sanctuary city, for example, and there's a mayoral race, all of a sudden Trump is a factor in that as well. Okay, so it's interesting to see how that has played out. That's not usual. Okay, presidential politics is not often done at the local level. And we're seeing it in all kinds of things. If you watch the mayoral or the governor's debate, well, it wasn't really a debate; it was two guys shouting at each other, it was kind of funny. And they absolutely said nothing. By the way, if you didn't watch it, don't bother. Okay, it was awful. Okay, but of course, that was the most thing the whole time. Are you supporting Trump or not? Okay, and it's really not the governor's place. It's like, yeah, nice thing to do or don't. Okay, but that should not be the key to a governor's race. What are you going to do for New York? Okay, and in my case, what are you going to do for Oswego County? Okay, I don't care if you support Trump or don't support Trump. What's going to happen in my backyard? Okay, we're going to talk about that factor in a few minutes as well. Okay, so it's kind of interesting. There is in this race the Kavanaugh factor, and there's absolutely no question about that. The Supreme Court is usually a tangential issue at best, particularly in a midterm election. Okay, trying to convince people that they need to keep the Senate or change the Senate because potentially there could be a Supreme Court nominee. That's just not a real big emotional issue in most elections. Having seen this, of course, over the last month or so, it may well be a factor. And Democrats in the last presidential election grossly underestimated that idea that the Supreme Court was important. It was out there. It was actually, for most polls that were taken in 2016, among Republicans, control of the Supreme Court was issue number 1 or 2. Among Democrats, it was issue number 6 or 7. And so, again, now all of a sudden, of course, it's jumped right back up there. Certainly did affect turnout. Republicans showed up in areas where they hadn't showed up in years. And that Supreme Court issue being an important one. And of course, the addition of Neil Gorsuch to the court almost immediately, and when Scalia died, and then of course the very divisive and very bitterly partisan issues over Kavanaugh, those hearings have actually energized both parties in this case, which is really interesting. That's unusual. You usually don't see that, something with that type of impact. Democrats are looking at the addition of 2 very conservative judges, and they are. Both of them are originalists and textualists. Okay, that is currently the conservative end of the court. That's sort of a wake-up call. Okay, so we got to rally voters to make sure that, in fact, if Trump gets another one, remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg's 85 now. Okay, and so she's in reasonably good health, but that could change. Okay, is this guy going to get a 3rd pick? If he does, we need to have our Senate in place. Okay, so that's been an energizer in some of these key Senate races. But again, until the Kavanaugh hearings, on the Republican side, they were worried nationally about malaise at the polls. Okay, that we don't have the spark. The issue's just not there. Okay, our people may not show up. Well, a lot of analysts say they are now. Okay, they watch that hearing and they say, okay, this is what's happening. And of course, Trump is playing right into all that sort of stuff. You might remember Mitch McConnell basically thanked the Judiciary Committee for energizing the Republican Party. So that is an important factor now, particularly in these swing races in the Senate. That can energize those local folks. Now, here's the problem with that. Unfortunately, in the United States, we tend to have very short memories. And keeping passion going for a month is a really tough sell politically. And that was about a month ago. So is that energy and passion from these hearings going to carry over a month later into the election or not? And that remains to be seen. That remains to be seen. Okay, and we will. One of the factors this time around is also the Me Too movement, which has been very interesting politically, largely after the election of 2016, when we started seeing, it really didn't start in Hollywood, the roots have been around for a long time, but these ideas about sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, all sorts of things, and the Me Too movement. Women have definitely been energized and are much more of a factor in this election than they have ever been. There are more female candidates for more offices across the country at more levels than there have ever been. And that's a good thing in many ways. And part of that, not all of it, but part of it was energized by this Me Too movement, and certainly that spate of sexual misconduct allegations and some convictions. Bill Cosby's conviction is in there too. A key group that deals with women, not women running, but women voting. The key group that people look at, one of the most important swing groups in the United States right now, are women in the suburbs and what are called the exurbs. An exurb from here would be like Fabius. It's the areas outside of the traditional suburbs that still tend to be wealthy, white, upper middle class areas where people are still commuting into a city perhaps. Okay, so when you look kind of at the outlying areas, Pompey, Fabius, in our area, maybe not as much, maybe Skaneateles, those would be considered exurbs. So how will those women vote? People were actually pretty shocked, political analysts, that by and large they did not rally to Hillary Clinton. There are thoughts that, particularly like the Philadelphia area and the Pittsburgh area, which are two of the areas that have been very well studied, there were thoughts that those areas, which have been traditionally fairly Republican, might swing over. They did not. They simply did not. How many will swing to women candidates this time or Democrats this time? Nobody knows. Okay? Nobody really knows. And then you also have an interesting problem with prediction. Obviously, there's a lot of polling going on, and particularly in these two areas and areas similar to those around the country, and with women. And the answer, of course, and it depends on which polls you read, of course, but many of the polls are predicting that this time many of these women will slide over to the Democratic side. You always have to think in polls about what's called the Bradley effect. Okay? And you might remember back in the late 70s, a man named Edward Bradley ran for mayor of Los Angeles. He was an African-American man. There were three major candidates, and according to all the polls, he was going to walk over and be the next mayor. Because everybody was asked, who are you voting for? I'm voting for Bradley, yeah. Entrance polls, which are not legal in New York, but they are in California. People going into the polls were asked, who are you going to pull that lever for? Oh, Bradley. Hey, all right, great. Exit polls. Who'd you vote for? Oh, Bradley. Yeah, well, okay, so all the polls right up to when the election was counted were predicting a win for Bradley. He got crushed and came in third because, believe it or not, people lie. And the basic idea, nobody wanted to be tagged as a racist. Okay? So of course I'm voting for Bradley. Well, when they get into the booth, you got a whole different story. Now nobody's with you, you vote for who you want. So that is also, there was some of that in the presidential election. There were women in many areas that said, oh yeah, Hillary, but the results didn't show that. Okay, so is the Bradley effect going to be part of that? We don't know. This group, particularly in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, not so much like the Montanas and stuff like that, but where you have fairly large suburbs outside fairly large urban areas, they've often balanced. Nassau County is a good example. Outside New York City, Nassau County is traditionally very Republican. They currently have, I think, a Democratic supervisor, but that's been real hardcore Republican territory right outside one of the largest Democratic centers in the country. And that's fairly typical. So will that be different this time because women can vote for women candidates? And we're not sure. We don't know. It's certainly a factor to think about. And it's part of it. Race and immigration are huge issues this time. Again, not as much for us living in central New York, although we should probably be a lot more concerned, particularly about immigration, because one of the biggest places for illegal immigration, believe it or not, off the Mexican border is right in our backyard. Also, one of the main conduits for potential terrorists, that we're not sure they're coming, but certainly illegal drugs and all that, is the border between New York and Canada. And one of the problems there is you have a huge international Indian reservation, where neither federal government really has control. So there's, but we don't really think of it in those terms. We're looking south. Law enforcement will tell you you really should be looking in your own backyard. But again, that's not a huge issue here. Certainly is in Arizona, in Texas, New Mexico, areas like that, Southern California, of course. But one of the things that has been energizing, of course, is the Black Lives Matter movement. And just in the last couple of weeks, is this march toward the American border by the groups coming out of Central America. Those are charged issues, but they also tend to be more or less regional issues. We're concerned at this part of the country and all that, but again, it's not a live or die issue for us. It's probably not going to make or break a candidate which way they fall on this group of people coming up from Guatemala. But it might in say, southern Texas. Okay, please.
Tied in with that, in this morning's Post-Standard, it's an article by Associated Press about how immigration has helped the city of Buffalo.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very interesting read. It's the same thing that's happening.
Well, and take a look.
And it explains how the current administration's reduction of immigrants is now affecting Buffalo negatively.
Oh yeah, and that's true for Utica, for example. There's actually been a fair amount of work done in the city of Utica. It's anecdotal here in Syracuse. I'm not sure anybody's done the analytic work that's been done in apparently Buffalo, but I know it's been done in Utica and in a number of other cities as well. And so it's an important issue, but is it important enough for people to vote on that issue? Is what the question
Once you grind down to the element, it becomes an impact. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times yesterday, about a technical firm that is trying to bring in 3 technicians from China or somewhere, and they cannot get them by the federal government to okay them, and it's stymieing the growth of that company.
Yeah. Again, that's what's called anecdotal, though. That's the company may be saying that. And again, people that want to say that that's not true. So why not hire American engineers? It's not like we're not producing them. Okay, and you can make an interesting counter argument for that. My daughter graduated RPI now more years ago than I wish to talk about. Only half of her class got hired. Okay, they're all good, qualified engineers from an excellent college. Okay, and so how true is the idea? Well, we can't find engineers. Well, there's about 200 of them that took one of her friends was a 4.0 mechanical engineer, all kinds of great co-ops and all that sort of stuff. It took them 3 years to get a job. Okay, so again, there's a give and take to that. I'm not disputing that at all. I agree with you. And certainly immigration has helped the country. We all know that. Every person sitting here, at some point, there was an immigrant, or 2 or 10. Okay, in your background. So, there's no question. Problem, though, and again, if you go down to the border, you get a whole different perception on that. There are a lot of problems on the border, a lot of crime problems on the border. The idea, here, caution, I know, again, it's hard to see. Smuggling activity is common in this area due to proximity to the border. Be aware of your surroundings at all times. If you're a camper or a hiker in southern Arizona, southern New Mexico, you got to watch yourself. There's a lot of illegal activity going on across the border, and if you're the witness to it, that might be where you're buried. And so it's not a gentle issue by any means for those who are right on the front lines, but it is an interesting issue. These are also issues. Again, I just happen to pick on the Corn Belt. Immigration is not as big an issue there. For one thing, they're not using immigrant labor to the extent that, say, California is, or we are here in New York. There's a lot of immigrant labor just to our north, along Lake Ontario, and the apple and peach orchards and so forth. There's a lot of immigrant labor here. Not as much in the Corn Belt, but again, in the areas right along the border, it's just a big issue. So that's that regionalism that I was talking about a little while ago. What's the issue in your area, and what's the impact in your area? Now, one of the things that's interesting, again, both of these issues, race and immigration, are huge issues for the millennials. They are real important issues for them. The question, of course, will they come out and vote? Will they actually vote? So it'll be interesting to see. There actually is a Pelosi factor. Now, she's not running for anything except her home district, but she is definitively a factor. There's no question about it. She is as divisive as Trump is. Those who like her, love her. Those that don't like her, hate her. There's no rationality to that. You know, well, why? Why do they? It doesn't matter why. They just don't. And of course, if you're watching the ads from the 22nd district next door over in Madison County, Utica, that funny district goes all the way down to Endicott, she's a factor. Is Brindisi going to be her man or not? Well, you listen to one set of ads, most definitely, they're practically married. His ads, no, he's not. And she was an interesting factor. Remember last year, there was a special House election outside Pittsburgh. The Supreme Court had actually declared a district illegally gerrymandered, so it was re-gerrymandered, and that meant that they had to have an election. And this was a district that had been Republican for 30 some odd years, but this time they actually had a Democratic opponent to the guy that sort of lost his district, who looked good. But his campaign was fascinating. First of all, the first thing he campaigned on is I'm a hunter. And yes, I think rational gun control is a good idea, but I'm not a rip it out of my cold dead hands person, but I'm also, you're not going to rip it out of my hands. And that sold very well. That's in Allegheny County, big hunting area, so forth. His other big thing is I am not Pelosi's man. And he ran specifically on that. And that yes, I'm going to be a Democrat, I'm going to get into Congress, and I'm not going to pay a damn bit of attention to what she says. And he won by 20 points. So she's a factor, like it or not. She's a factor.
Please, is part of the problem for her the fact that her district is in San Francisco?
It probably doesn't help everybody else. And she's actually from Baltimore, actually Annapolis. Right. There's actually a street named after her in Annapolis. And and that's part of it. I think part of it too, she's very aggressive, there's no question about it. She's very partisan. And she's a take no prisoners Democrat. And of course, there's no question about that either. She's a woman. And women in those powerful positions face a lot of obstacles. There's absolutely no question about that. But she is very divisive. And again, look at the ads from the 22nd, coming out of the 22nd district.
She's been there for a while.
Oh, she's been there a long time. Yeah, she's been there a long time, and she will be there until she decides not to be. Basically, she's one of those that now, which is why, by the way, she also makes a good speaker because everybody owes her something. The longer you're there, the more favors you've collected. And she's actually, I believe that if she's not the top fundraiser, she's in the top 2 fundraisers in the House, and that goes a long way in your speakership. Because then you can go out and campaign for all these other people, and then they owe you again. Again, I wouldn't say that she's a major factor, but when you're in a very tight race like next door, that's a toss-up race. And every poll is telling you that. It's too close to call between Claudia Tenney and Anthony Brindisi. If this swings 25 voters, one way or another, will that be enough? And we're sitting in a district, the congressional district now, that we are in, I'm presuming most of you are in Onondaga County, Oswego County, and then the West. Remember that 3 times in the last 5 elections, our district was decided by less than 1,000 votes. And once, when Emory Berkel won, it was what, 600 votes? So a small factor like this can end up being a big factor in an election. So it counts, it matters, it matters. There's still a Bernie factor. He's out on the campaign trail. He's still there. He's still popular, particularly among younger Democrats. In some areas, the Democratic Party has taken that hard left turn that he asked for. If you read a lot of the Democratic literature being written, there's a whole wing of the party saying the problem with the party is we've just been Republican light. And now it's time for us to move left where we belong. And Bernie was sort of the spear point of that. It's very potentially divisive within the party as well as with the electorate in general. And some fear that this may keep traditional Democrats away from polls in some key races. Okay, now, primaries are their own thing. Primaries are interesting because loyalists will come out, but also those that want change. Primaries also rarely draw more than 10% of the registered voters in a district. So it's relatively easy to put somebody up there who can get a big following, who really doesn't have as big a following as you might think. They have a big following among a small group that will vote in the primaries, but then what about the other 90% of the party members? You know, they look at that and go, "Are you kidding?" Okay, and the Republicans learned that the hard way with the Tea Party. Okay, about 10 years ago. These Tea Party guys, boy, could they win primaries. Could not win a general election. Okay, too conservative. Okay, and are we going to see that with some of the harder left candidates? Possibility. Okay, it's a possibility. And again, some think that might be the case. Bernie followers rally, and they're really good at rallying. But will they vote? Okay, will they vote? Because by and large, they did not. Okay, many of them in 2016. Okay, so we'll see what that. But he's still there, still a factor. Some of the progressives. Okay, this is probably the hardest left candidate out there today. This is Cortez from the New York district, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's from that interesting district in the Bronx, okay, that is a transition district. It used to be one of the old Irish neighborhoods, and in fact, the representative there was there for years and years, was #4 Democrat in the House. Lost a primary to her, because the district is still very heavily Democratic, about 90%, but it has also become heavily Hispanic. And so he lost. Now, she upset, again, a very long-standing, powerful Democrat, and we have seen that happen on both sides. You've seen some long-standing Republicans defeated by upstart candidates, and you've now seen Democrats defeated as well. She is probably going to be elected. She's probably in the safest district in New York. Again, it's literally a 90% Democratic district, and somewhere around 75% Hispanic. Okay? And most people don't even know she has an opponent. Okay? She does. Okay? Snowball's chance in hell comes to mind. Okay? About his chance to be elected. He is playing up her radicalism. It probably will not overcome the thing she has going for her. Her ideas catch headlines. Okay, the press loves her because her ideas are that far left. Her first act, she wants to impeach Trump and impeach Kavanaugh. And then she came out last week, she wants to pack the court. Okay, we need to put in 6 more justices, okay, so that we can get the guys that we want in there. Okay, all that sort of stuff. She wants to eliminate ICE, okay, and all that. So it's really, those are very hard left opinions, probably none of which will happen. Okay, but that's what she's running on, and again, she's going to be elected. Now, when she gets into the House, okay, what happens is going to be a whole different story. Okay, because you get Nancy Pelosi sitting at the top going, I don't think so. Okay, and you're Congressperson number 435. Okay, you're not going to do that kind of stuff. But in a fairly divided district, her election would be much more questionable. So we'll see. But I'm expecting. I would be very surprised if she does not win. That would be a real shock. Huge factor in this election are millennials. Okay, will young people come out and vote? Again, remember, you're looking at those under 35. Traditionally, those particularly under 30 have the worst record of voting in the United States. They simply don't show up at the polls. They're notorious for attending rallies. Okay, they like to rally, they like to go to stuff, but they don't come on the Tuesday elections. They are also now the largest generation of Americans. In 2014, they passed baby boomers as the largest generation. They are 1/4 of our population at this point. Okay? 1/4 of our population is between 18 and 35. They also make up 20% of the registered electorate, okay, at this point. But again, the big question is, will they vote? Okay? Will they vote? Now, many of the election issues this time are their issues. That was not necessarily true in past elections. So will they actually come out? One of the problems with this group, less of a problem now than in the presidential years, a lot of the candidates do not reflect this group. Many of our lead candidates are in their 60s, 70s, some in their 80s. They don't reflect this group at all. And even we will know, by the way, on November 7th, who's running for president. Because some of them have already showed up in New Hampshire. Jeff Flake was in New Hampshire. What's he doing there? You're scouting ground. But again, to pull out candidates that are in their 70s and 80s, are they going to excite? Now, Bernie is in his 70s, but are they going to excite this group? at that level. Hard to say. Okay, hard to say. If they do show up, they are going to be a substantial factor in the elections. There's no question about that. Yeah,
I
please.
work at the polls in the 17th district,
Okay.
and those people are vehement about if their children, have they voted yet? They call them right away.
Yep.
They get them to vote.
Yep.
Why is that different than, we all should be doing that?
Well, that's it. You get the direct contact. Okay, I drive my kids to the polls. You know, I don't have a choice. Take them out to lunch afterwards. So, you know, so, yeah, I know that. I know they're coming. Hey, now I know what they do in the booth. That's entirely up to them. But they're showing up.
Yes.
Are you talking about the 17th ward here in
Syracuse.
Syracuse, yeah.
That particular ward,
Tom, excuse me, you're a retired social studies teacher.
Yes.
And one of the perceptions, I think accurate, is that the teaching of civics to young people over a pretty long period of time now has been problematic, and that young people have not absorbed a lot of important things about democracy, and especially history. Are you as a retired social studies teacher, what is your perception of that accusation?
It's accurate. Less so in New York State, because civics still is part of New York State, and we have a required senior, it's not an elective, it's a required senior course in government. That concentrates more on local government than national government. But nationally, again, through the work that I do at Williamsburg, I've met teachers from all over the country, particularly with Common Core, which stresses English and math. One of the ways that social studies is being taught is through English. We don't teach the Declaration, for example, as a political event. You look at its grammar structure, how Jefferson used it. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. So yeah, you're reading the Declaration, but you're not reading it, and that's the social studies end of the Declaration. So yeah, I think we're in trouble. Of course, with what we heard about Justice O'Connor, yesterday, she's pulling back from civic life and all that. That was one of her big issues, was civic literacy in the United States, and accurately so. I'm distressed. It's again at the national level, and with some of the things that are happening in public education, not as much in New York State, but certainly in other states. Civic education is in trouble. I think you're absolutely right. Please.
The 8th grade test that they give in social studies is more about reading,
Yes.
than knowledge. And
Yep.
actually, if you read a little farther, you discover the answers to the questions that are asked earlier.
Yeah. There's all kinds of issues.
Yeah.
so you're saying the social studies courses given to 8th graders, you said, or 8-year-olds?
Eighth graders.
8th graders is not civic pointed, it's English literature writing pointed.
Well, it's not
Reading-
writing.
reading
but-
comprehension.
Yeah, it's reading comprehension,
yeah.
it's not knowledge.
Yep. And that is true. That is
So
true.
they're really not learning civic history.
No, in
or
class
that.
they are, but the test is not
Yeah.
focusing on that.
Class is still what I do with it.
Yeah.
Okay, and you get to a certain age, of course, when you're a lot older than your principals and other people, and I never taught with my door closed, and I don't care. I'm not teaching with the door closed, but I teach my damn well please, and you're going to come in, and you can come in anytime you want, and I'll still have good results for you. If you teach a good course in American history, your kids are going to do fine on regencies or tests, whatever else. Doesn't really matter. Younger teachers don't have that advantage, which is unfortunate, but it's true. Very important truth: numbers don't matter. We can have 2 million new voters. That number in and of itself might be exciting, but the number in and of itself is irrelevant. It's where are they that's going to matter. And again, going back to that example, you got 100,000 more Democrats voting in Central California. Who cares? It's just 100,000 more Democrats voting in Southern California, Middle California. You get 10,000 more Democrats voting in Wisconsin. Now you've got some issues. You've got some potential. And as I said earlier, even here in our own couple of districts here, you get 100 or even 1,000 new Democrats voting here. You're going to swing House districts. And mayoral races and all sorts of other things. So it's where those numbers are that matters, not the numbers in and of themselves. And bottom line in all voting, it's the economy. That's what matters to people. People will go in. There are people that are party loyal, of course. Most candidates will tell you they can expect a certain percentage of the vote off the top because people will simply walk in, I'm a Democrat, I've always been a Democrat, and I'm going to vote straight across the line. Okay? Or the same thing true with Republicans. You also have, there's certain, believe it or not, even in this day and age, there are people who think the people who are on the top line are the ones that have been chosen by wiser people than me. So they will simply vote across the top line. Honest to God, you know, I kid you not. And you can count on that. That's why in local elections, particularly now if you're a Republican having a Democratic governor, it could be a disaster in a close election because the governor's party gets the top line. And so, but that's, you know, that's it's just a truism. It's true. But the idea, most people at the end of the day will vote with their wallet. Okay, am I better off than I was before, or what's going to happen to me? Please.
I don't know how many slides you got left here.
A lot. I'm trying to move.
Is one of them voter suppression?
Not particularly for this one, but that is an issue.
It's a huge issue.
And not as much for us, but you get to like the Georgia and Florida elections. Another issue in Florida is the storm. Okay, the Panhandle is traditionally Republican territory, and you got those people don't even have houses, much less a place to vote. And is that going to impact a very close senatorial race and a very close governor's race? And then in Georgia, the issue is how many people have been taken off the voter rolls, legally or otherwise. And will that affect the voter outcome? Absolutely, absolutely. Please.
Well, what do you think about the Indians who, for a long time, and suddenly, somebody has decided that because they don't have house numbers, just a short time before the elections. So what do you think about that? I mean, do you think it's going to make that much of a difference?
It's and again, is it? There's two sides to that too. As far as is it actually happening before the election, or are we hearing about it before the election? Some of this stuff has been going on for years. It's not new, and some of it, you know, now you've got people looking for it as well. Not that it's not important. It is. It is. Now, one of these problems that we have are, and we're seeing them too. When you look at ads that start talking about billions of dollars, if you're a normal, everyday, average American, you're going to glaze right over because that number is so unrealistic. I mean, we don't. There's actually a single winning ticket to yesterday's. You know, what is that person going to do? You know, now they're only going to end up with half of it because half of it is taxed. They're still going to end up with $800 million. You know, that's an enormous number. It's an enormous number. Just again, to give you an idea, and I know some of you have heard me say this before, if I were to have you count to 1 million, 1 second at a time, starting right now, you'd be done before Election Day. If you were going to count to 1 billion, 1 second at a time, you'd still be counting in 2029. Okay? That's the difference between 1 million and 1 billion. And when you start talking about 1 trillion, if I had given you $1 trillion the day Homer started writing the Odyssey in 800 BC and ordered you to spend $1 million a day, you'd still have 136 years to spend $1 million. That's how much 1 trillion is. And we just don't comprehend those numbers. So when people start throwing out your $1 trillion deficit, what the heck does that mean? Okay? And if I'm one of those people, that 25% in Oswego County that's underemployed, I really don't care what $1 trillion means. What I care about is are my kids going to have enough to eat tomorrow? Okay? So all of this kind of stuff doesn't necessarily translate down to personal finances. Who is going to help me at this point? And that is key, especially when you get to like in Oswego County, you know, some of these outlying areas, rural areas. That's matter. How am I doing matters often much more than all these other things. And nobody, including you and me, wants some outsider coming and telling me I'm not voting in my own best interest. Okay, you know, that just doesn't fly. And you hear that a lot. Well, oh my gosh, these people aren't voting in their own best interest. Who are you to tell them that? Okay, you know, who do you think you are? And nobody wants. You don't want somebody to tell you that. Neither do I. And so that doesn't work. That just doesn't work. And it is all about the economy. Money. All right, don't get me started. But I've already started, so we're good. All right. Since Citizens United, okay, and now money was a factor before, but since Citizens United, it has gotten so much worse because that freed up all sorts of money to be spent on political campaigns everywhere. The Texas Senate, now these figures are a week old because they haven't been changed. There's an excellent site called Open Secrets. What they do is they take the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, monetary thing, and they distill it so that you and I can understand it. And I also check them out on the FEC site, because I actually do understand that. But they, on just the Texas Senate race, there has so far been spent over $95 million for a job that pays $175,000. Okay? That's obscene. That is obscene. And I'm quite sure that number is much higher. Okay? In this week, and you got a week, 13 days for the election, it'll go much higher. Democrats have poured $60 million into defeating Ted Cruz. Okay? And that's unbelievable. Okay? And right next door to us in the 22nd Congressional District, over $6 million spent in that district. The highest numbers that were ever spent there before were under $1 million. Okay? And most of that is coming from outside the district. Okay? It's not from within the district. Some House districts have exceeded $20 million. Okay? House districts. Okay? That's unbelievable amounts of money. And again, large amounts of that are coming from outside PACs. Okay, into these districts. It's not being generated by the district itself. Okay? I love this cartoon. Okay. Now the totals are unbelievable. Okay? House candidates, since the beginning of the primaries, have raised $1.43 billion to support candidacies. House candidates. Okay? That's unbelievable. $350 million of that came from PACs. Okay, so outside groups supporting various candidates. Senate hopefuls have raised $870 million. And remember, there's only 35 Senate seats up. So you're talking about 70 candidates, okay, have raised $870 million. Okay, those are obscene numbers. Those are absolutely obscene numbers. Okay, and you as a citizen have the absolute right to ask, what is being purchased for all that money? Because nobody's giving that kind of money without expectation. Nobody. I don't care who they are. Now everybody targets the Koch brothers. They're not alone. They're not even in the top 15 of who's giving money. And again, you can look that up.
What about the people who are getting the money?
That's the other issue. Now, some of it's indirect. The way that PACs work, the candidate and the candidate's campaign committee cannot be directly in contact with a PAC that's supporting them. That is one of the rulings, it's actually one of the sub-rulings after Citizens United. So they don't have any control over that necessarily. But there's also direct contributions. And they're limited in their amount, but you can have a whole lot of them. Okay, please.
Every single day, every time I open my email, I have 2 different emails. There's at least 5 or 6 emails requesting money
Yes.
for Democratic candidates, DCC or Beto or somebody.
Somebody. Yep.
You should change your email address.
Well, even on Facebook last night, I opened up my Facebook account yesterday, and there was an ad for Heidi Heitkamp. They asking me to contribute to her campaign in North Dakota. And it's like, I got my own concerns right in my own backyard here. And good luck. But again, yes, and that's opened up a whole new avenue. The whole idea of social media and stuff like that. Here's the number, though. This came out this morning from the Center of Responsive Politics. They are anticipating $5 billion to be spent on this election. And this is a midterm election. Imagine what that means for 2020. Okay? Imagine what that means for 2020. Even in barely contested races, the numbers are enormous. Kristen Gillibrand, who is in no trouble whatsoever, has raised over $20 million. And in fact, she's in such little trouble. Can anybody actually name her opponent?
No, I didn't even know.
Yeah, well, I've gotten that a lot. I didn't know she had an opponent. Okay, well, she does. Now, her opponent has actually managed to raise a whole $1 million and so forth. And again, money certainly isn't everything, and we have seen that. Candidates with very little money have beaten big money candidates, but it doesn't hurt. And just for your own edification, Shel Farley is her opponent. Okay? Right now the numbers are 70-30. It may end up higher than that. She is in absolutely no trouble whatsoever. My only complaint about Kirsten Gillibrand is she sounds like a 12-year-old. Somebody has to voice coach her. They're touting her as a national candidate, but she needs to stop sounding like a little girl. And it's not her fault, obviously, but especially when you hear her on the radio. She needs a voice coach. So if any of you know her, hey, tell her. Now, what about negative ads? Because that's all we see. Frankly, I can't tell you what John Katko or Dana Balter stand for. I know what they think of the other person, but none of them have actually come. Neither of them have come out to, particularly neither of them come to Oswego County and told me what they're going to do about the problems we have in our county. Neither one of them has set foot in the county. So I do at least get calls from Katko asking me to take part in telephone stuff. Yeah. But it's we have registered Democrats in my house, and we haven't even gotten a fund request for the Boulder campaign. That shocks me. That shocks me. But it's that's a problem. But I know all the negative ads. I can tell you if that's the only thing I'm looking at. I can tell you that. We were brought up, especially our age group, believing that candidates actually had to come and solicit your vote. That they needed to appeal to you directly because after all, they are your representative. And in local elections, by and large, that's still true, but we're seeing less and less of that. What is more important today in elections, even now drifting down to the House and certainly even some of the lower races of that, is simply to get out the loyalists. And frankly, I want my loyalists out, and I really don't care about the other loyalists. The problem with that is if you're elected, you still have to serve those other people. And that's being forgotten also. And a trend that I also find extremely disturbing in representation. Whether you like those people or not, you're still their representative. And boy, it sure doesn't seem like that. You're really not going to change minds with negative ads, and that's not why they're designed. In this election cycle particularly, it's getting out the base. Can I get my base out? And negative ads are a great way to do that, whether we like it or not. Why are ads so negative? The very simple reason: they appear to work. It's sad truth, but truth nonetheless. When we start going under that idea, why do they work? We get ideas about the dominance of television, for one. We are a very site-based culture. Computers as well have shortened attention spans. Nobody really, especially start to get into a debate about economic issues and see how long that goes. If anybody if they started, the governor candidates actually debated economics last night. The interesting statistic would be how many TVs got turned off and how fast during the debate. The people just, they're not interested in that. Placing primacy on entertainment. We want that ad to be entertaining as well. It's not enough to be negative. If we make it entertaining, the more better. And that's why you get the pictures you get. It looks like the candidate's about to vomit, and that's considered good. And you're promoting basically that single memorable, sound bite or visual, and that's the idea. Believe it or not, there are rules, and there are actually workshops. There are professionals who will go out to the parties and the candidates and teach them how to negatively campaign. It's really interesting. There are times when you should run a negative campaign. When you're running against a strong incumbent, negative campaign tends to be a good idea. If you're being hugely outspent, but still have enough money for some TV time. When nobody knows you, and when your opponent has undeniably done something wrong. You don't want to throw a negative ad out there accusing somebody of something and then having it not be true, because then it falls back on you. And it does work. Who responds? They excite the base. There's no question about that, because it verifies what they already believe, whether it's true or not. So the base gets excited by negative ads. It does not change anybody's mind. There's absolutely no evidence that a negative ad changes anybody's mind. I was going to vote for this one, and boy, I saw that negative ad, and I'm going to vote the other way. Rarely happens, maybe never. One of the things that negative ads do, that in a tight race like our districts here, where we have a lot of independents, people that are not registered parties, one of the things that negative ads do, it keeps the independents away from the polls. They don't like them, so they won't vote. And that can be a tactic. Keep that large body away from the polls. They reinforce pre-existing suspicions, and they're memorable. And studies show that. People remember negative ads much more than they remember positive ads. And that's what you want. You want that negative ad up there when you're going into the polls. This is a great cartoon. I know, again, it's too small for some of you to see. It's Abraham Lincoln. My name is Stephen Douglas, and I approve this message. And, his words are silky, but what does he really stand for? He says he's a backwoods innocent, but when he got to the big city, he sold himself to the highest bidder, and something like that. And it is kind of interesting. What would that negative campaign look like, for the 1860 election? Pros have some warnings too. You can't be too negative. We don't like that. Okay, so you have to be rational in your negativity, I guess. If those things are compatible. Voters don't like too much negativity. And then you got to check your facts, and then you better check them again. Doesn't mean you have to tell the truth. That's not so. But what you say at least have to have some factual basis. And you can stretch the truth, but not too far. And Stephen Colbert here, there's nothing wrong with stretching the truth. We stretch taffy and it makes it more delicious. To be honest with you, we may laugh at that. That's an extremely dangerous statement about stretching the truth and what that means. That's it. You need to be careful about that. Most of us are aware, this is where we go back to civic education. Are we training our students to understand what exactly is truth and what it isn't, and how to spot stretch truth? That's the whole issue of the Russia issue. The Russians did, they were all out on the internet, putting out ads. Which ones are true, which ones aren't. If you're not sophisticated enough to understand that, you might actually believe that stuff. Always use humor when possible, even in a negative ad. You need to focus. You can't inundate the public with tons of information because they won't listen. You never put yourself in a negative mailing. Never, 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 never. You let PACs do that kind of stuff. Actually, for mailings, you let the PACs do the negative mailings anyway. Your campaign doesn't want to do that. You can attack an opponent's religious beliefs as they apply to issues, but not their personal religiosity. And we see that particularly in the abortion debate. Conservative Catholic candidates will be called on that, and rightly or wrongly, but they will be. And we actually saw that in the hearings for, I can't remember the judge, a woman from Missouri there, was up for a minor judgeship, and Dianne Feinstein asked her, you're a Roman Catholic, you're a conservative Roman Catholic, is that going to affect your opinion on abortion? Is that a fair question? If you think so, yes, and if not, you don't. But that's touchy. That's an edgy question. And of course, you better prepare yourself because you're going to get a negative response. And you most certainly are. And again, the twist in this is that many cases, because of Citizens United, the candidates don't have control over all their own ads. PACs, in fact, they're not allowed to. They are not allowed, the candidate himself or herself and nobody in their campaign can be in direct contact with a PAC that's advertising for them under Citizens United. So they have absolutely no control over the content of these PAC ads that are coming in. Absolutely none. So if you have a candidate that's trying to run an upscale, positive campaign, a PAC can undo that in a second. And there's nothing that candidate can do about it.
Concerning this slide up here, we've all seen the ads Catco's run about Balters of Florida, taxes, and the fancy place she lives in.
Yep.
And the newspaper did some fact checking.
Yes, they did.
To refute that.
Yep.
And yet, when confronted by it, Catco comes back and says, I agree with my ad.
Yeah, well, what's he going to say? He's kind of tied into that, whether he likes it or not. And again, is it true? Yes, she lived in Florida. Apparently, she did actually live in that house, but her tax bill was on $111 or something like that.
$4.
Okay, and she had to pay a fine on top of it. But yeah. So was the ad lying? Not completely, and that's the issue of stretched truth. That's the issue of stretched truth.
Can that come back and hurt him in that respect?
Probably not, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Okay, again, it's for the loyalists. Okay, so people who are going to vote for him anyway, look at that. They already had a negative opinion of Alder, so that just reinforced what they believe. And it wasn't meant to convert anybody to his line. This is one of my favorite posters. Okay? On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Okay? But the internet has opened a huge market for unofficial campaigns because anybody with a $19 program can create a meme or anything else and put it out on the internet. And if you've got a Facebook account, you can do whatever you want on there. The internet is absolutely unregulated. And some of these get widely distributed, whether a candidate or a PAC wants them to or not. And of course, we know that some of them are not even generated from within the country. Okay, and because you have a freewheeling, unregulated internet, that becomes a problem. It's now up to the internet providers to actually monitor the internet, not a government. Okay, and so there are issues with that. Okay, impact is uncertain, but it's of certainly increasing concern. Okay, just very quickly, national picture. There are 35 Senate seats up this year, 2 in special elections. Ordinarily, it's 33, 33, 34. Now, here's the issue. 24 of these are being held by Democrats, 2 by independents who vote with the Democrats, the rest by Republicans. To swing the Senate, the Democrats need to hold all of their 24 seats, plus the 2 independents, and swing 2 of 9 Republican seats. That's a huge order. That's a huge order. It also means that if Heidi Heitkamp, for instance, loses North Dakota, which is looking more likely every day, now you not only have to hold the rest of your seats, you've got to pick up 3 of 9. And so the general call is the Senate is probably not going to change control. Big probably. We just don't know. You never know until people get into the booth. But that's a very tall order. 10 of those Democrats are in states that went for Donald Trump. Now that may or may not be a huge factor. We'll see. Because there are other factors. Incumbency is a huge factor. Yeah, you might be of the party that, Democrat obviously in a Trump state, but if you've been there for 2 terms, 3 terms, that may not matter. Incumbency does matter. Your past record in state politics may matter. Do people like you for what you did? Okay, even if you are not, they didn't vote for your party in the presidential. What's your opponent matchup? Who are you running against? Okay, and there's some interesting races nationally when you look at it. A couple of these folks are actually running from out-of-staters who moved into the state, in some cases less than 10 years earlier, and you have that native, non-native issue in states. And that's a very sensitive issue in a lot of states. We in New York tend not to care about that. But you can say like Colorado, something like that, that's big stuff. North Carolina, because those out-of-states folks want to increase your taxes. Look at all those New York retirees that end up in South Carolina, where taxes were low. Well, they came off Long Island where they're paying $25,000 a year in taxes, and they see $400 taxes, and they want better roads, better schools, better lighting, better this. They're willing to put their taxes up to $5,000. If you're a South Carolina native and you've paid those $400 taxes for your whole life, and now your taxes jump to $5,000, you got an issue. You got an issue. So those things are important. And there are, of course, a lot of intangibles that go into these Senate races as well. So it's hard to say. The outlook, however, is not brilliant for a key number of the Democratic candidates. And we're seeing numbers changing all the time. And not necessarily in favor of Democratic incumbents or Democratic challengers in some of these states. Most analysts think that Republicans will hold the Senate and possibly gain a seat. Now the other side of that, by the way, I see a lot of people shaking their heads. We have tended to be most productive legislatively when the houses are not controlled by the same party. Because they have to do, in order to do anything, they have to agree. And you can't sit there for 2 years and get nothing done. Because most people, I mean, actually, you may not like what got done, but a lot got done in the last 2 years. You may not like it, but take a look at the record of what happened. And again, now, if we were having this conversation in, let's say, South Dakota, you'd be saying, yeah, a lot happened, good. We're in New York, we have different opinions. So it's, it all, again, it's regional, it's interesting. But we tend to get most progress when the houses are not united in that sense. The House is different. Democrats have to flip 24 seats and hold on to all the ones that they have, or again, some combination thereof, to get to the magic 218. That seems very likely. Polling as of Sunday indicated that 206 Democratic seats are either secure or favorably leading. 199 Republican seats are the same. Nothing, of course, is in stone. Things can happen, but these results are pretty likely. That leaves 30 seats up for grabs, 29 of them currently held by Republicans. So the Democrats are at a real advantage here. They only have to flip, I think, 12 of these seats, 13 of these seats, and that seems likely in many, many places. Okay, locally, right now, if you look at the polling information, it's expected that Catco will hold the 24th seat. He moved from leaning to likely just in the last couple days. In our two neighboring districts, those are both registered as too close to call. The 22nd, which is Claudia Tenney's district at the moment, over Madison County, Utica. That's really odd. It starts in Utica, cuts across to the Madison Onondaga County line, and then drops straight south to the Pennsylvania border, and then goes across to Endicott. It's a very strange district, gerrymandered obviously. She will be very strong in the rural areas, and he will probably win Utica and quite possibly the Elmira area. So it depends on, again, who shows up and where they are. So listen.
Two things. Thank you ever so much for coming so totally prepared. And,
Not really fun.
I also believe, because I believe that the Senate races, the money that is being spent on the Senate races is to avoid any impeachment concern if it does get to the Senate.
Oh, there's no question that that's an issue. Okay, and again, now, will the House actually go for impeachment? Maybe. First of all, keep in mind, impeachment is not easy. Okay, it's not easy and it's not casual. There has to be a crime, okay, and an accusation is not a crime. Okay, there has to be a crime. Now, it can be a misdemeanor. Does it have to be a high misdemeanor? Because the law says high crimes and misdemeanors, so nobody really knows that. Okay, but obviously, all you need in the House is a majority. That's the easy part. You need 3/4 of the Senate. Okay, so it isn't going to happen in the Senate.
And
It's
that's
not
the
going to happen in the
reason,
Senate.
that's the backfill of that.
Oh, sure.
They're saying to themselves, where are they gonna get that 3/4?
And they're not.
And they know,
They're not.
and they know it.
Yeah, even if they flipped all 9 of those seats and retained the ones, they still wouldn't have enough. Okay, so that begs the question, is it even worth the effort? Okay, would it be worth, or would we as the public see that as a colossal waste of time? The last impeachment, of course, Bill Clinton, Rehnquist, Justice Rehnquist called those the most wasted 11 hours of his life. Okay, we're sitting in there in the Senate chambers listening to that because it obviously wasn't going to happen, and it was a total waste of his time. Nobody understood his humor, by the way. He took a lot of flack. Remember, he had the funny robe with the gold bands on it and stuff like that. That was from, I believe it was from the Mikado, the Lord High Executioner's costume. And nobody, he's a big opera fan, and like nobody understood that. They all made fun of his robe, and it was really just a swipe at the whole process, which was kind of interesting. Paso Delgado, that's the mid-Hudson Valley. That has been a deep Republican area for many, many years. Now Delgado is a newcomer, he's a young man, he is Hispanic, and that area, of course, has seen a very heavy Hispanic influx as well. Paso may not make it. This is a tough call, and it'd be kind of interesting. Most of the other seats in the state are considered pretty safe for whoever's holding them. And so there are some that are still considered leaning one way or another. One on Long Island, the one in Buffalo is in Collins, and so forth. But he's, by the way, he's likely win. A change in the House could have a lot of impact over the next 2 years. Obviously, there are going to be calls for investigations, special prosecutors, all that kind of good stuff. That happens every time one party changes to the other and the president stays in office. We have to investigate everything that president has done. And the president before that and the president before that from the other party. We have had special prosecutor law actually went into effect in the 1870s. Between 1870 and 1973, there were 5 special prosecutors. Since 1973, there have been 27. And they are expensive. This Robert Mueller is costing you and I millions and millions of dollars. He is an attorney, a very high-priced attorney, and these are billable hours. He is not a government employee. And he's working with teams of attorneys as well. This is a mega $1 million investment
Every day.
that we're making every day. Yeah, pretty much. It'll be interesting to see the bill, and my suspicion is you and I will never see the bill, but they'll need a 10.
How about the thought that I originally had of how is this election going to impact 2020 voting habits, voting candidates, that particular presidential election?
It will be interesting, and it really is going to depend, I think, on what actually happens and what gets done in the House and Senate, or what doesn't get done. If Trump can continue his agenda, and he stands a good chance. Obviously, if he stopped, then the Democrats have a better chance, I think, at that. It's really interesting. He's such an interesting candidate. Like him or don't like him, he's a fascinating candidate. Because, to be honest with you, I don't think he actually ever expected to be president.
Yeah.
Okay? I really don't think he expected to win. But he also, everybody misjudged the temperament of the American people in 2016. There was a lot
They
of
still do.
unhappiness. Oh yeah, they still do. There was a lot of unhappiness. Again, there were 3,000. If you look at a county map, okay, of the United States, we have roughly 3,100 counties, or parishes, the equivalent of counties in the United States. Hillary Clinton only won 57 of them. Okay, it takes 60 to win the presidency. They have to be the right 60. So there are 3,000 Oswego counties out there, okay, and that was grossly underestimated, really, by both parties. Okay, because remember, the Republicans wanted Jeb Bush, and their money says so. Jeb Bush raised $121 million in 5 weeks. Okay, and remember, he was late in naming it. There's no question that's who the Republicans wanted. Donald Trump never raised that amount of money, period. And he was around 30 million right up until the last 2 weeks before the election. And I think he made it up to 50 million. Hillary had about 325 million in her war chest. So he was not the favorite candidate. And he's going to be challenged within the party as well. Again, Jeff Flake has already pretty much tipped his hat as to what he's going to do. There will be other challengers as well. But I think if the Democrats do take the House, you can't just be an obstructionist. You got to be more than just anti-Trump. You have to do something. And whether that's undoing some of the things that Trump has done, that's going to be hard with the Senate. The Senate stays Republican. But you got to show some progress. You can't just be against something because you're not going to win the next time, especially should Trump actually be reelected and there's another coattail effect. So we'll see. But yeah, I think it does. It certainly has an impact.
I want to hear that little giggle about reelection. I want to hear that nod.
Right now, at a much different level and at a very important level, one of the things that very subtly happened between 2008 and 2016 are Republicans took over local government. They won over 1,000 legislative seats in the state legislatures. And it wasn't done quietly necessarily, but nobody was paying attention because everybody was watching Donald Trump and those candidates. 31 state legislatures are controlled by Republicans, only 14 by Democrats, 4 are split, including New York's. Nebraska is a whole different story. You just put a big X through Nebraska. They have a unicameral legislature, and by law, it must be nonpartisan. So the parties do not have that kind of impact. You run as a party member, obviously, but once you're in there, their party structure is different. There are now 33 Republican governors, 16 Democrats, 1 independent in Alaska, 25 states fully controlled by Republicans, 8 by Democrats, 16 split. Now, the scouting report on this, and it's very important, at the governor level particularly, most of the governorships that are up this year are Republican governors. And there's a good possibility that about half of them will flip. And that becomes important, not because that united the governors do anything. They don't. They meet, obviously. But it becomes important in 2021, after the 2020 census, because the governor is going to have a lot of say over gerrymandering in the new census. And we in New York are probably going to lose 2 House seats. And other states are going to gain. Florida will pass us. Texas may well gain 1. California may gain yet another 1. Stuff like that. And now in some states, governors are forbidden. They're not allowed to do that. In Florida, for example, the governor may not veto a redistribution plan. In other states, the governor has nothing to do with it. In some states, they pick the commission, but then they're out of the picture. In other states, like New York, Governor Cuomo is going to have a lot of say over those districts. So these are very important races. But again, the expectation of the moment is that about half of them will flip. If any of you watched Frontline last night, you'll see exactly why. It was on the Kentucky teachers' strike this year. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It was a really good one. It's always a good show anyway. But all of a sudden, governor of Kentucky has basically PO'd somewhere near 400,000 public employees. That's never a good idea. Okay? So in New York, Governor Cuomo will be reelected. Okay? There's no question about that. That will not change, but our Senate is going to be interesting. Okay? The Senate, of course, has been on the edge for many, many years, but the governor himself used his money, okay, as well as the state Democratic Party and a lot of outsiders, not only to defeat Republicans, but to defeat the 8 members of the Independent Democratic Caucus. And they succeeded in defeating 6 of them, okay, in primaries. Okay? And so the expectation is that the Senate, state Senate will flip, okay? And we will have Democrats in control for at least the next 2 years, totally in the state. Now, we have a problem in New York State. We all believe, and rightly so perhaps, that this is the most dysfunctional state government in the world, not just in the United States. And it is. It's terrible. However, that said, 59 of 150 assembly seats are non-contested. Okay? 59 of them. That's better than 2 years ago when 65 were uncontested. The state Senate, 22 of 63, a third, they are uncontested. And that's basically due to gerrymandering. Okay? You know, if you're in my district, for example, again, Oswego County up through the North Country, heavily Republican. Patty Ritchie is our state senator. Now we have actually elected Democratic state senators, okay, in the past. But at the moment, she's popular enough that it's not worth the Democratic Party spending any money. Okay? If you want to run, go ahead, but you're going to fund your own campaign. Okay? And that's true in obviously 21 other districts as well. That we should actually be embarrassed about that, to be honest with you, as a state. This is my final slide, and then I'm almost done. Okay, we'll take whatever question. I'm not going anywhere. I have nothing else to do this afternoon, so I can stay. Our attention is usually drawn to national races, okay, and state level races to a certain extent. But when it comes right down to it, the races that affect you and I most, okay, are for our town, county, school board, and those legislative positions. Okay, the likelihood of you or I ever meeting the president, whether we like him or not, is pretty narrow. The one public official we are most likely to meet is the town justice. And I would bet that half of you or more cannot name who your town justice is. And I do that very gently because I was, and some of you were at that session too. I was giving a session over in Fayetteville, and I used that, and the town justice was sitting right there. so it does happen. But these races are also very important, and they cannot be neglected. City council, for those of you that live in the city. These are the people that really decide your tax bills, what your schools are going to look like, what your neighborhood is going to look like, if your road is going to be repaired. Now, and I'm not going to tell you that the national government is not important. It certainly is. But I sort of want my road to look decent in front of my house so that I can get where I want to go. So don't forget these races either, and pay attention to them. Okay? Pay attention to them because they are critical. And most important, folks, get out and vote. Okay? It matters not a whit to me how you vote, but it does matter if you vote. Okay? And so get out and exercise your citizen rights and be a voter.